Hi, and welcome to another episode of the At Home with the Roosevelt special virtual program. Today we have a special featured researcher, and his name is Dr. Christopher Brockman, and he's going to talk to me about his experience in the archives and his wonderful research into FDR's fireside chats. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy you joined us today. Thank you. So, could we start just by having you tell us about yourself and your research and give us an overview of the great work that you've done over the past few years?
Absolutely. So I've been studying FDR's fireside chats, specifically during the period of the New Deal for about 20 years now. Most of that time was as a PhD student at Lehigh University, where I studied politics, social class, and blended that study of American history in the modern era with digital humanities work. And that's where I have found a lot of success in my research on FDR and the aforementioned fireside chats. My research has taken two publications that are currently in the works. The first is my dissertation, which is Building a Coalition, FDR, the Radio, and the American People. And that focuses extensively on FDR's use of the radio to communicate with the American public. And that typical dissertation has broadened into a digital format in the form of Writing FDR, which focuses on the letters written back and forth between the American public and the Roosevelt administration. A tremendous amount of that work being done at the FDR Presidential Library. So I'm thrilled to be here.
So, Chris, why fireside chats and why study the public reaction letters?
So that really goes to the root of how I pursued the research at the FDR Presidential Library and my research in general. I felt passionately after listening to the fireside chats about two really different perspectives. The first one has been covered by historians for years, and that is the friendly, very efficient, and for the most part, just incredibly clear delivery that Franklin Roosevelt used on the radio, and the ability for him to attract clear connections with his listeners. Now, I heard that part, and I heard that loud and clear as I listened to the fireside chats. But another perspective I heard was the broad and very intentional delivery of the New Deal through these presidential speeches on the radio, again called the fireside chats. And I thought there was more of a story there. I thought there was something that we should really latch onto as not only a presidential format for communicating with the public, but also delivering his presidential aims, his presidential agenda per se. And I also wanted to look at, in terms of the public reaction letters, who are writing to Franklin Roosevelt and why are they writing? Specifically, the idea of how did they connect with Franklin Roosevelt's program? How did Roosevelt leverage that access to introduce ideas, to reinforce their practicality, reinforce why they would help get America out of the Great Depression, and over time defend those programs against critics. And so I really thought there was more to the fireside chats than just FDR's masterful delivery. And as it turns out, there is much more of a story there.
Hmm. Well, those letters that you mentioned are some of my favorite in the whole archives. So I would love to hear more about your experience researching and finding those letters and the process that you undertook to put your story together.
Great. So I'm going to share just a couple quick slides as to the step-by-step process that I took, which involves both research method and the actual steps that I took. So the first thing that I did when I arrived at the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Presidential Library and the National Archives, because while most of my research is done at the FDR Presidential Library, the research did take me to Washington, the archives there. So I'll talk about that a little bit as well. So as I was capturing these letters, the previous studies that had been done on the public reaction letters are they're doing a survey of them. They're capturing pockets and coming to conclusions resulting in those pockets, those assessments. I wanted to capture all of them. And so what I did was I photographed each one of the public reaction letters from the first 8 fireside chats, which deal with the launching of the New Deal. And while I'm photographing them, I'm using a program called Office Lens from Microsoft, which crops them and flattens them so they become PDF primary sources very easily. And while that process was happening, I was reading those letters and developing further research questions in detail, targeting particular speeches, targeting particular demographic groups that I saw unfolding before me. And after I collected all of those letters from the Presidential Library, approximately 4,000, a little bit more than 4,000 in total, I used software from George Mason University called Tropy. And the reason why I did that was because I didn't want the photographs when you're using the digital product to appear as one page is one artifact, because that's not really the truth. When we're photographing these letters, if they're several pages long, we want that to be an actual primary source in itself, a combination of those pages that forms the letter. And when I use Trophy, I could also refer to the source information, because I want people that use the digital product to be able to go to the physical letter and look at that physical letter if they wanted to. And after I created this database of letters, then I moved to a spreadsheet formation where I'm noting spatial data, such as addresses and location, demographic data, who is writing this, are they married, are they not married, are they male or female, approximate age if they list that, and then going on to the physical letter properties. Is this a typewritten letter? Is this a handwritten letter? And so on. After I captured that information, I moved it onto a program called ArcGIS. And that allowed for me to capture census data and apply it to my letter set. It also allowed me to create distribution and heat maps for geographic analysis. And after I completed that spatial analysis, I could use that same program to move my research forward, to create dashboards that fuse the demographic data with the spatial data to really assess what's happening here when the message goes out through the radio, and how can we capture that listener data to really understand who is listening and who is, most importantly, responding to these important presidential speeches. And then finally, after I have captured that information, I can put that into a digital exhibit, which is the webpage that I'm going to show you today. I want to take this opportunity to, if I could come back to from the screen share and speak to Kirsten, I really would like to thank the archivists for the thousands and thousands of staples they took out for me of these letters, because when I'm capturing them, you can't capture a stapled letter. And sometimes they have 7 and 8 staples in them. So a real shout out to those archivists that took literally thousands of staples out for me. And it was an absolute pleasure to look at the public reaction letters, which PPF 200B is the specific file that I'm looking at, because the Roosevelt administration did a fantastic job in categorizing those letters. So very seldomly do you see a speech and then hundreds of examples of people responding to that speech. And that really allowed me to progress through my research to the point where I could think about, wait a minute, there's a huge gap here. And then the last thing I want to say here on this topic is when I compared the letter sets, the first 8 speeches, hundreds of letters, almost sometimes thousands of letters per speech. And then for one particular speech, the June 24th, 1933 fireside chat, the third in the series, there are less than 40 letters. And I thought to myself, that can't be, because the Roosevelt administration did painful preservation to allow for someone to come in, decades later and look at these letter sets. So where are the third fireside chat letter responses? And so that took me away from Hyde Park to Washington, D.C., where I found this depository of letter sets in the National Recovery Administration files, 6,000 in total. And that allowed me to really look at not only the letters themselves, but the efforts that the Roosevelt administration took to preserve these letters, and then in turn transfer them when necessary to a particular New Deal administration. So that was a great find as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. The Roosevelt administration often the White House Executive Office would refer mail to the government agency they thought most likely to take action on certain issues. So if some of those public reaction letters were asking for help or commenting on programmatic elements that he had mentioned in the speech, it makes sense that he would have sent them down to Washington, to the administration itself. Yeah. That's great, though. I'm so happy to hear about your success in your research. It's what archivists love to hear most. So thank you, Chris. Sure. So could you show us your wonderful website and talk a little bit about the historical insights that you gained and how you've illustrated those so nicely online?
Absolutely. I'd like to start by referencing an image that is really powerful for me as a researcher. And that is because I walked into the presidential library every day to do my research, and I saw this opening. And it has a tremendous quote from Franklin Roosevelt about the idea that we need to focus on the individuals that had too little. And so that takes you right to the people suffering during the Great Depression. And I pictured individuals taking a piece of paper and writing down their difficulties and how they think Roosevelt can help them, and then using the very few cents they perhaps had to put that in the mail to the president. So I'd like to show for a few minutes the digital project, because what we see here in this digital project is that you do see those downtrodden, those people devastated by the Great Depression. But you also see an incredibly powerful demographic that has yet to be entered into the body of work of what's called the Roosevelt Coalition, the people that supported the New Deal and really drove the support for Roosevelt's program. But before, I just want to introduce Writing FDR. This is the digital platform that I use to present my research in conjunction with the prototypical traditional narrative. And so when we click on maps here, this is going to show us the digital and spatial plotting of those letters. And so when we go down to the distribution map here, these are all of the letters that are placed on the map. And we can filter that in a number of ways. We can first filter by zooming in and out on the map to get an approximate location of where these letters are spatially located. Each one of these dots refers to a collection or one letter. So if I go ahead and zoom in to Philadelphia, I can see that there are many letters scattered on the map here. And when I click, it's going to give me a sample entry here. It's going to show me the name, the date, where that comes from. This is very close to where I'm speaking from you today. And if I click View Record, that's going to take me directly to a digitized version of this letter. You can see these are the kind of letters that I expected to see. Someone scrawling on a piece of paper their views, how they have interpreted Roosevelt's speech. You can see this beautiful signature at the bottom. And again, hope to hear from you at some time. This is the kind of letter I expected to see. But in reality, and I want to switch to, in a few moments, the other demographic views that I have. But for the viewers at home watching, there are many other maps here that we can see. The heat map as to how the frequency of letter writing occurred throughout the country. And at the top, you can toggle through, if I just want to see the May 7th speeches, I can do that. Or if I want to just see the first 3 speeches, I can do that just with a click of a button in these filters. But moving on, and there's other maps to consider, moving on to the demographics page, I expected to see letters from individuals like this, the downtrodden, the devastated. I did not see that, though. When I read these letters, I saw a tremendous middle class demographic here. When I look at letters and telegrams, the most common form of letter is a telegram. That is an enormous cost for someone to send. And then from there, I see letters on typed letterhead. So if I wanted to just look at letters from the San Francisco area that were typed, I can choose that area here, and that's only showing me letters that were typed on letterhead. If I wanted to just show letters that were either typed on letterhead or typed overall, I can do that. And then when I click on the point, this is going to show me the record, Mr. Heading, that wrote from Lodi, California. And when I see this, I don't see scrawling letters of the downtrodden. I see solid middle-class individuals that typed out their response. Let me switch to the actual letter. I don't see what I expect. This is from an attorney that listened to the March 12th speech. And so, and that is where I get the demographic of these letters. It seems though Roosevelt used the radio to communicate with the solidly middle class that are listening to these speeches. And it adds to our understanding of the Roosevelt coalition, because we're not just talking about union workers or people working in the Works Progress Administration or individuals that are unionized. We're looking at individuals that support the NRA, that support the idea of the New Deal progressing over time. And so that brings me to my next tab here, and that's the people and the president, looking at this relationship between Roosevelt's ability to speak to that solidly middle-class demographic and show them why his New Deal is going to help cure the Great Depression. From a digital humanities standpoint, this was the relationship I wanted to have. I wanted to have my narrative, my analysis on the left, and the actual digital product on the right. This balance between the traditional narrative that historians have been using for centuries and this digital component that I feel so passionately brings us to a new look into the fireside chat. So Kirsten, if it's okay, I'd like to take a few moments and look at some specific letters. Is that all right?
That would be wonderful. Thanks.
All right, great. So we're going to start with the May 7th speech that Roosevelt delivered. This is what I believe the first time where Roosevelt will use a broadcasting format that will be used for the rest of his presidency. He outlines his program. Now, the March 12th fireside chat, equally important, but that is discussing the bank holiday, which frees up American currency. It allows people to return currency to the banks. It's not the focal point of the New Deal. The May 7th, 1933 speech starts to deliver the National Recovery Administration, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, these pillars of the New Deal, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which put people to work doing environmental tasks. These are pillars of the New Deal that are announced on May 7th. And so I'm going to zoom in here to Indianapolis. And this is just showing, oh, zoomed in too far. Sorry about that. Indianapolis, this is just showing letters from the speech of May 7th. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this larger so we can just see the map. And, sorry, wrong point. And so we're going to look at a key for mayor. And when we bring this letter up, we see an individual that leads with, by the way, I'm a lifelong Republican, which is such a fascinating turn of events where we have Republicans that apologize for not voting for FDR, but want to write him this letter thrilled about his fireside chat. But to my point about the New Deal, your recommendation given over the radio last Sunday night in regards to industry and government joining hands to protect the profits of industry, create additional employment, increase wages is the soundest and most constructive thought that have been announced by any president of this country for over a century. This is a solidly middle-class individual talking about the profits and the blending of capitalism away from the laissez-faire perspectives that dominated the early 20th century. And so what I'm trying to make clear here is that we're not just having individuals write to FDR praising his broadcasting style. We're seeing Americans writing in favor of the New Deal. To choose another letter that really reinforces this, we're going to go to Philadelphia. Benjamin Christoph. Now, he is going to speak from an industrialist standpoint, from the Navy Tone Company. Again, a bold letterhead. He is, or was, excuse me, the secretary of this company. And he is writing saying that in the years back, the people were enslaved by the machines. And since the machines were developed, they should be used by the advantages of all people. And skipping down a couple lines, we who have been in the industry for years know it means that to have unfair competition with its long hours of labor and its underpaid workers. And so we're seeing in this May 7th speech, solidly middle class writers that are supporting Roosevelt's New Deal right from the get-go. And so I'm going to move on to another speech, October 22nd, 1933. One of the significances of this speech was the support for the NRA and the ending of the gold standard. And so I want to look at a speech from, oh, I zoomed in too far. Sorry about that. From Pittsburgh. So we're going to zoom into Pittsburgh here. And I chose Pittsburgh in this case for a couple of reasons, because when you click here, you're going to see 1 through 20. This is actually, these letters are telegrams, so they do not have a specific address associated with them. So the ArcGIS software puts them all in the middle of Pittsburgh. And so we have 20 telegrams sent from Pittsburgh. And when we click on that telegram, we're going to see your message Sunday was most heartening, especially your position on gold, from the Remington Rand Company. What's interesting about this letter set is a tremendous amount of members of the Remington Rand Company wrote to Roosevelt in support of his gold policy. So we see this almost corporate identity of letter writers moving forward to support Roosevelt in his policies. But if I zoom out a little bit, in the suburban Pittsburgh, we also have this gentleman, S.M. Vogel. And when we look at his letter, we have the NRA symbol right there up at the top. And so you can see transitioning from the third fireside chat, the June 24th fireside chat that I mentioned earlier, to the fourth chat on October 22nd, we see the integration of the NRA symbol and his response to his Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chat. Prior to your radio talk, there had been considered pessimism in our own district, and it might interest you to know that among many of my associates, the phrase has been coined. It's a fight between Wall Street and Main Street, but they realize that your administration is on the side of Main Street. So as the fireside chats emerge, we have this class-based support for the Roosevelt administration. If we have time, I'd like to mention one more speech, and that's the September 30th speech, which I think is just so incredibly important. Kirsten, do we have time for a couple more letters?
I'd love to see a couple more. Thanks.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that I'm respectful of our time here. And so I'm going to talk about this September 30th speech and what I see as an us versus them mentality emerging in Roosevelt's speeches. Up until this point, he's really preaching the idea of government partnership with industry and the ability for the NRA, the National Recovery Administration, to use and leverage the NRA codes to progress in recovery. And he is going to start to use this mentality of you're either with this recovery method or you're a chiseler that is just out for your own benefit. And it really starts to segment the population between supporting the Roosevelt administration or resisting the administration's plans for overall recovery. Now, this really comes through in the first the re-election campaign of 1936. But I argue you start to see this in the fireside chats early on in 1934. And we have a couple of letters that really go to this us versus them mentality. So I'm going to make my map larger so that I can see it. If I wanted to, I could filter by date as well. So we have this timeline here. And if I click on October 2nd, it's just going to filter out all those other letters. So if I had a date range I really wanted to focus on, I could click on these date ranges and filter by date. But I'm going to continue to filter by location, and I'm going to open up this this map here. Get rid of my date filter so we can see a little bit better. And it is optimized for touch of those. For those of you who take a look at the project, you can use this on a tablet. And so I'm going to go to Lorain, Ohio. I'm sorry, Dayton, Ohio. And we'll take a look at this letter here. I wanted to mention that there are very few and far between, but there are criticisms of FDR's presidential announcements, specifically his delivery, which is really ironic considering he's one of the first presidents to do this so effectively. You stutter terribly in your speeches. I don't think you have the confidence. I don't really believe you are sold on your own ideas. Answer me. Who wrote your speech against public sentiment? I need an answer. So I wanted to show this because it's not all tremendously positive support, overwhelmingly positive, but not all. And so I wanted to conclude my section of looking at these letters by showing you another way of accessing the letters. So we've seen that the project uses geospatial analysis to plot the letters on a map. We use letter distribution here. We also use demographic data in terms of responses. So if I only wanted to look at people that mention this us versus them mentality, I could click this and it will filter down and only show me letters of that nature. But if you had a specific place that you wanted to look at, specifically I mentioned earlier on George Bretz from Lorain, Ohio. So we're going to go to this database of letters here. And the first dot on the left is the records from the Presidential Library in Hyde Park. So I want to look for Lorain, Ohio. And if I hit search, here he is, George Bretz. This is the letter I wanted to share. I highlighted it, sorry about that. And we'll let it load. And I'll bring it up full screen for us here. We listened to your radio talk Sunday night and keenly enjoyed it, especially your definition of liberty and your effective reference to English policies. But as we go down here, and most heartily do we concur in your proposed truce between capital and labor, pending satisfactory adjustments of difference by impartial arbitrators and through the adequate provision of settling future controversies justly. So not only is this individual referencing the fireside chat and how Roosevelt is portraying the New Deal, but they're also saying, well, this is great, but this is how it's going to affect me personally. And as long as we can get arbitration from capital and labor, I think this is going to work out great. So I'd like to show one last letter from Austin Levy of Rhode Island. And what's really significant about this letter is he's writing from the perspective of a company. And, oh, I clicked too far. And so I'll read the attachment. The president does not remember the name of the man who gave this to him. However, I think we sent a memorandum to someone in the Stillwater Worsted Mills, and perhaps the name appears in the memorandum. And I was never able to find who this worker was in the Roosevelt administration, but this letter absolutely came across FDR's desk for this reason. And it's incredible the power of the fireside chat that happens here. Continuous employment. Another question arises as to whether in fixing minimum wages on the basis of an hour or weekly wage, we have reached into the heart of the problem, which is to provide an annual earnings for the lowest paid worker as would meet his minimum needs. So what this company did was they quoted the fireside chats in commitment to supporting the New Deal program. And so I really think that this solidifies the idea that middle class individuals, perhaps even upper middle class individuals, are utilizing the fireside chats as a medium to gather an understanding of the Roosevelt administration and what the president is seeking to do. And in this case, they're actually quoting the fireside address as support for their perspective and why they think the New Deal program will work. So I hope that takes some of the examples and brings them to life for those individuals that want to take a look at the project.
Wow, thank you so much, Chris. What a resource, and what a tremendous amount of research and web development and wonderful interpretive work went into that resource development. I just think it's amazing. Thank you for sharing it with us. Yeah, it's we're hoping to share the link to the resource itself called Writing FDR, so that everyone can dive in themselves and see these thousands of letters and do some research of their own if they'd like, with the new tools that you've put forward, which are just remarkable. So
Thanks very much.
yeah. And for the audience, if you have questions for Chris, you can put them in the chat on Facebook Live and YouTube. So we look forward to talking to you more and sharing this resource, because we think it's wonderful.
Thank you very much again for having me. And I want to emphasize to individuals watching that as much as I love the digital tools, there is no place like the FDR Presidential Library to go and do research. It is the best place on earth as far as I'm concerned. And don't take my word for it. Go hold those letters, because it is a treasure for sure.
Thank you. I agree. And it is a special place with really, really wonderful collections. So thank you very much, Chris.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that winds up our program for At Home with the Roosevelts today. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us next time.